Welcome back to our fireside lectures. We're on lecture 2. We're going to keep talking about that triangle of philosophy, and we're going to talk about metaphysics and epistemology. Continue thinking through that together. So metaphysics is what you believe actually exists in the world, what your concept of reality is. So metaphysics is usually broken down into two subgroups or two sub-studies called ontology and cosmology. Ontology is the study of being. Cosmology is the study of the cosmos. So in America, we call someone who goes into space an astronaut because they sailed the stars, sailor of the stars. In the USSR, when we were having the space race with them, they called them cosmonauts because they were individuals who sailed the cosmos. So you can think about cosmology is that greater big reality out there. Ontology is the study of being. So if you're still like, what does that mean? I can help you think it through with a little analogy. Think of a box. You have a box. Put everything you believe that exists into that box. So everything that exists, put it into the box. You're in the box, your parents are on the box, chairs are on the box, stars are on the box, the solar system's in the box, clouds are on the box. Without being offensive, God is in the box. Everything can fit with it is in that box. What you believe exists is in that box. That box as a whole is your cosmology. It's how you believe the world works, or the universe works, or the cosmos works, how reality works. When you pull something out of the box to study it on its own, that's ontology. So you have the box, everything's in there. What's in there are dogs. When you pull the concept of dog out of the box and say, what makes a dog, that's ontology. You see, cosmology is the box as a whole. Ontology is when we study certain things on their own. So I'm going to give you one more distinction because it'll help you later on. When we do ontology, ontology itself is kind of broken into two parts. This comes from Plato. And ever since Plato, we've always used it. It's called essence and incidentals. That second word has a lot of different meanings, but essence and incidentals, and that means everything has an essence and everything has an incidental. So let's think about dog. Think about your own dog, Rover, or whatever your dog's name is. You got Rover. When you ask yourself, what makes Rover a dog? The thing that makes him a dog is his essence. He has the essence of dog, that's the thing that makes him a dog. Everything else is an incidental. So you think about Rover has a tail, but having a tail doesn't make you a dog. I know that because if I cut his tail off, he's still a dog. Rover barks. That's an incidental. Not barking doesn't make you a dog, though, because if he never barked, he would still be a dog. Rover has 4 legs. That's an incidental. All dogs have 4 legs. Cut one of them off, he's still a dog. So everything that accompanies the essence with Rover is incidental. But the thing that makes the dog, that's his essence. So you think about humans. What makes a human, that's their essence. And everything else, my hair, I have 10 fingers, 10 toes. All that is just incidentals. But we'll talk about that later. If you're saying, Dr. O, that was a lot of distinctions. There's metaphysics. Within metaphysics, there's cosmology, and then there's ontology, and then within ontology, there's essence and incidentals. I can help you think it through with solipsism as a metaphysical view. So I'll give you a concrete example. Solipsism is a metaphysical view, and it's the belief that the only thing that exists is the man thinking. So if I was a solipsist, I would believe that the only thing that exists is Armin, is Dr. O. If Dr. O was a solipsist, that means the only thing that actually exists in the universe is me. Everything else is a projection of my mind. So think about the box. I'm saying the only thing in the box is me. If I'm a solipsist, obviously I don't believe that. I'm the only thing in the box. If I studied myself, if I thought about what I project out there, what makes a dog in the solipsist worldview is I call it a dog. Because I'm the only thing that exists. What makes a chair, if I'm a solipsist, is, well, it's a chair because I call it that. Because I'm the only thing that actually exists. I'm the only mind in the universe. I decide what's out there, and I give it their essences or their definitions. Does that make sense? Well, as we go through it, you'll get more and more comfortable with this concept. That's metaphysics. After metaphysics, there's epistemology. Excuse me. Epistemology is what makes how do you know what you know? And the root comes from epistis, trust or confidence, knowledge. Like, how do I know what I know? And how does one have knowledge? So, let me give you an example. You're looking at me right now. How do you know that Dr. O actually exists? Whatever mechanism your mind is doing to affirm that belief, that's your epistemology. Look at your laptop if you're watching this on a laptop, or look at your phone if you're watching it on a phone. How do you know that thing exists? Whatever you're using, whatever reason you give, that's your epistemology. Usually we say knowledge has three parts. We won't need this for this class, but I'm just going to give it to you for the sake of completion. That all knowledge is justified true belief. All knowledge is justified true belief. By belief, I mean I actually believe it. By true, I mean it, for this class, it corresponds to reality. Actually, like the wall is white. What makes that statement true? That in reality, the wall is actually white. And justified, I have some reason for believing that wall is white. So this is one of the most, you can imagine, one of the most hotly contested realms of philosophy. It's very, very, very difficult to prove anything epistemologically. So one of the most difficult philosophical questions out there, or one of the most difficult philosophical problems, is the problem of continuity, which is, how do I know everything didn't just pop into reality this second? Like, even in my mind, the history I have of the last 10 minutes, what if that just came into reality right now? How can I prove that reality has existed outside of this exact moment? Very difficult to actually do. But you see why this question of knowledge is one that the philosophers talk about. But for this class, let's think to the solipsism. Let's think through the triangle as a whole before we jump into the next part. So all three, epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, they all touch. And once you make a claim in one of them, you naturally make a claim in the other. Once you make a claim in one of them, you naturally make a claim in the others. So let's go back to the solipsist guy. Let's say I'm a solipsist. That's my metaphysical position. Because I'm a solipsist, what makes something good or bad? Well, there's nothing outside of myself. So whatever I decide is good or bad, that's what's good or bad. Because there's nothing outside of me. I'm the only being there. I decide what's good or bad. Epistemology, what makes something true or what makes something right or wrong, is like, well, if I say so. Right? Because I'm the only being that exists. Now, we can see a little breakdown of the solipsis. There are people out there who will argue with you that solipsism is true. So what they mean by that is they'll come to you and they'll argue with you. Let's say Bob is a solipsist. Bob will come and argue and say, Bob, he'll say, no, solipsism is real. I'm the only being that actually exists. But the very act, his action, his ethics of him trying to convince me that solipsism is true is telling me what? Oh, he actually doesn't believe that. He actually has different metaphysics. So if I enter through ethics, I can see what his metaphysics is. And him trying to convince me that solipsism is true, it tells me that he thinks I actually exist. And he's trying to convince me of that. And then that tells me whatever epistemology is doing is faulty. Let's think through another worldview. We can see this, since we've talked about Christianity before, we can talk about it again, right? Metaphysics, if I'm a Christian, what is my metaphysics? That Christ is God, right? If Christ is God, that's in my metaphysical system, he is God. What must I do? I must do everything he tells me. What makes something right or wrong? Well, if he's God, the golden rule becomes right because he's told me to do it. What about my epistemology? If he's God, my epistemology becomes whatever he has revealed as true. You see? Or we can go the other way. If I'm a Christian, I can go from my epistemology to my ethics to my metaphysics, or any way I want. If I'm a Christian, I say, oh, the Bible is true. That's my epistemology. The Bible tells me Christ is God. He's God. And then I know he's God, therefore I do what he says. You see how those work together. And once I make a claim in one of them, I got to make a claim in all the other ones. Okay, with that said, let's talk about formal logic when we go back to epistemology. So for this class, we're not going to think through all of the wonderful epistemological problems out there. All we're going to think through is logic as a subset of that study of epistemology. And usually there are two forms of logic. When we talk about logic, we think about formal logic and we think about informal logic. So formal logic, let me back up. Sorry guys, let me back up. The human mind has only two tools to know things, actually. It has what's called a priori and a posteriori reasoning, inductive and deductive reasoning. So when you think, you only have inductive and deductive reasoning. Those are the only two things you can do when you're thinking. Inductive reasoning, or a posteriori reasoning, which posto means after the experience. A posteriori reasoning is gathering pieces of evidence and then creating a hypothesis to define that evidence. It's what a scientist does, or explain that evidence. It's what a scientist does. The best example of a posteriori reasoning or inductive reasoning is to think of a detective. What is a detective doing? He's gathering pieces of evidence and he's explaining that evidence. He goes to the crime scene. He sees a dead body. He sees my shoe there. He sees my knife there. He gets DNA tests. He sees my hairs there. What conclusion does he draw? Oh, I killed him. Right? He's using inductive reasoning. He's gathering pieces of evidence and he's using that He's creating a hypothesis to explain that evidence. A priori reasoning is what we would call like formal reasoning, and it works in syllogisms. And logically, it works like this. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. You did that on your own. I'm not teaching you how to do this. Your mind just already does it. That's called deductive reasoning. The problem, when I told you earlier, the problem we have, why we can never, the knowledge problem I gave you, is because inductive reasoning, what a scientist does, what I did as a detective, is never 100% sure. It's never 100% sure. Think of that example. You saw my shoe, found my hair, you see the dead body. You're thinking, oh, Armin is the murderer. But you're one piece of evidence away from changing your mind. If you find in some guy's notebook a plan for framing me, right? You got a new piece of evidence. I'm going to frame Armin. I'm going to steal his shoes. I'm going to steal his hair. I'm going to use his knife. Now, because you have this new piece of evidence, that claim that you made about me being murdered is thrown into question. Because we can never have all the data, we can never have all the information. Anytime we make an inductive claim, it's never certain. A priori claims are always 100% sure, but they're what we would call empty. I use like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That necessarily follows. That has to be true, right? The logic always works precisely. The problem is all men are mortal. That's an inductive claim. The claims I make when I do deductive reasoning are based on a priori claims. So I can never know anything, if we're just thinking about logic, I can never know anything with certainty. It's a huge logical problem. But when we say formal logic, we're thinking of a priori reasoning and the rules that govern a priori reasoning. We're thinking about what are the rules that make things necessarily follow. I should say one more thing. A priori, Aristotle talks about this. He says there are 3 rules that govern all a priori reasoning. But for the sake of our class, we'll just focus on one of those. And that rule is the law of non-contradiction. So all this reasoning, it really is. I told you there's 3, but all 3 are kind of re-saying the same point, and we can think of it just with this point. All the rules that govern this, that make it true that if all men are mortal, and if Socrates is a man, necessarily Socrates is immortal, everything that governs is based on one rule, the law of non-contradiction. That is, something cannot be, A cannot be B in the same way at the same time. A cannot be B in the same way at the same time. So look at your phone. Your phone cannot be a plane in the same way at the same time. All of logic, all of a priori reasoning is based on that one rule. So it's kind of remarkable when you think about that. But formal logic is doing that. We've talked that in formal logic, people have made a distinction between sound arguments and valid arguments. Sometimes people will say sound arguments are when something is true and valid. But for this class, we'll make a distinction between sound and valid. An invalid argument or valid argument is based on if the flow of the premises are right. So I just told you about that. If the flow is right. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is moral. That necessarily follows. That's right. That's a valid argument. I don't know if it's true, because whether Socrates is mortal, man or not, something I should investigate. But assuming that they're true, they necessarily follow. But I can say something like, all men are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Therefore, Socrates is a man. See, I made a mistake there. Because the category of mortal is bigger than the category of men. All men are mortal, but you know where else is mortal? Dogs. So by saying Socrates is mortal, Socrates could be a man, but he also could be a dog. Giraffes are mortal. He could be a giraffe. You see, that is an invalid, therefore Socrates is a man. That is an invalid argument. The logical flow, it has nothing to do with whether it is true or not. It's just invalid. Now we can talk about an unsound argument. All birds can fly. Penguins are a bird, therefore penguins can fly. This follows the same flow as that Socrates example. It works. All birds fly. If that's true, and if a penguin is a bird, and if that's true, penguins would fly. It would necessarily follow. Why is it that all this doesn't work? It's not true. It's because not all birds fly. The logic is valid, but one of the premises is false. Therefore, it's an unsound argument. That's the difference between valid and sound arguments.